Music Not Diving is brought to you by Acid Nation. What is Acid Nation? Well, it is a direct-to-consumer platform, a D2C platform in the vernacular. If you're selling music as an artist or a label, this is far, far better than the big DSPs, than the big streaming services. And if you're a music fan wanting to connect directly with your favorite artists, maybe even your favorite labels, well, this is absolutely the best place for you to be spending your time and your money. As an artist or a label, you can sell vinyl via Acid Nation, and they can press vinyl for you too, because they have their own pressing plant. They also have their own streaming service, which doesn't pay pro rata like the big streamers. It's a direct payment of 1 cent per stream, completely unique in this space. And actually, many of the other D2C platforms don't do anything like this. The ancillary services offered by Acid Nation are on another level. We use Acid Nation for my label, Hot Flash Recordings. Everything we do is up there. We couldn't recommend them highly enough. So head over to acidnation.com to check them out.
This is Music Not Diving with Scuba.
Welcome to the show. I'm Scuba. This is Music Not Diving. Okay, getting towards the end of the year. 2025 has been pretty crazy for us. We've had our move to video, which has been unbelievably successful. It's exceeded all of our expectations, actually. We just got a couple more episodes to go before the end of the year. On the show this week, we are welcoming an artist manager, someone who also is very high up resident advisor. So this is a man who has many fingers in many different pies, as it were. His management clients include Nightmares on Wax, and he just basically has a lot of experience in running campaigns, dealing with creative direction of artists and I suppose media institutions too. So this is a wide-ranging discussion about many different things which impact artists and impact new acts and legacy acts too. And yeah, he has got a lot of interesting things to say. So let's just get into it, shall we? Without further delay, my conversation with Kazim.
Brought to you by acidnation.com.
Kazim, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Morning. I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Good. Yeah. Thanks for coming on. So I don't always do this, but why don't you introduce yourself to the audience a little bit? Who are you? What do you do? What are you doing here?
I am Kazim, and I am a well-seasoned music executive. I split my time running a management company called Endless Love Show and working as a chief creative officer at RA, Resident Advisor, which is a prominent music platform.
Yeah, I think we would be aware of RA. We talk about RA quite a lot on this show. Not always in the best of terms, actually. So maybe you can make the case a little bit for RA. What does the chief creative officer of RA actually do? What does that entail?
So my role is chief creative and brand officer. So the company's sort of split up into like 4 key sections, and one of those sections is what we call the creative and brand section. So it's like most of the things that people see and interact with, the magazine, the publishing sort of channels, all the socials, the films, the events. We run a partnership studio called 2359, which is where we do our brand partnerships work. The experiential stuff, the PR, the communication, that all sits within my area of the business. And I look after a few teams of people. It's probably like 30 to 40 people who sit within those different departments across different offices, London, New York, Berlin, which is where I sit, and I've been smaller satellite offices around the world.
Okay. So it's essentially a sort of management coordination type role in terms of what you actually do?
I would say like we have an executive team of like 5 of us. And what I bring to that team is sort of like tasked with running the company globally. And what I bring to the team is the sort of the creative direction and the brand direction for how we should operate as an organization. So like what we decide to make, how we decide to put it out in the world, how we decide to sort of interact and sort of engage with the different and various communities that we serve and hope to serve very well. So that can range from, like sort of working with the teams to work out what we publish. It can work on what we decide to commission, experiences we create to like engage people, activity. Usually it's like the stuff that people like see, touch and feel, which is like the stuff that I work across.
Okay, so tell me also about what you do as an artist manager as well and how those two things interact with each other if they do at all.
Right. So I run a company called Endless Love Show, and we manage producers, songwriters, singers. Try and focus on stuff that I'm really, really into and really love primarily. And I mean, I guess what's similar to both of those pursuits is like ultimately trying to grow and build larger cultural businesses. So with artists and RA, or, you know, let's consider them like sort of corporate and artist clients, it's kind of the same task really. It's like how to build sustainable growing businesses that are credible, that are culturally sensitive, that like make people care about the thing that you're putting out into the world, and reach as far and wide as possible. The other thing that's interesting about both RA and working with artists is like particularly the internet and sort of digital media is changing dramatically. Artists are facing unprecedented challenges. So actually, like, I guess another thing that's similar is like both these environments are facing quite unique challenges right now. So yeah, I think there's a lot of learnings to be shared across both of those spaces. But they're quite like different, you know, they're quite different pursuits. But I think the principles of what I bring to both of those types of roles is pretty similar.
Yeah, I mean, these are two areas which we talked about a lot on the show. I mean, the kind of the challenges facing media, generally speaking, music media in particular, and then yes, of course, the challenges faced by musicians and creatives, generally speaking. But in the context of what we talk about on the show, absolutely, yeah, musicians. Was listening earlier to your appearance on the Jamie Liddell podcast, which was really interesting. About 18 months ago now, I think that you recorded it. And another thing that we often remark about on the show is the pace of change in the industry. And so I wonder, like, what's your coming to the end of 2025? What are your kind of takeaways from the industry in the kind of most immediate period? Like, what are the things that have wow, your camera is going all over the place. What are your takeaways from this year? What's happening?
I mean, hot takes are that
the hotter the better. Sizzling hot takes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the overwhelming sort of story is that it's becoming increasingly cripplingly hard to be a fully functioning artist who is able to like pay their rent and buy groceries and like live a happy life. I think that for me, like the big story for this last year, or at least since I spoke to Jamie, is like new stuff, breaking new stuff, which I think is like the reason we all probably like do what we do, is like our excitement by like new music, new sounds, new artists, new ideas. Like new stuff is becoming so incredibly challenging to back, which is a real shame really, because I think like the more people who are less incentivized to support new stuff, like the more boring everything will get. Like if you as a manager or an agent or as a best mate have no incentive to support this thing that you love that's brand new, like how will that thing be able to grow into something that's formidable? So I have seen in the last year, like, I just feel like I've seen so much stuff that I really love just like fall apart because they just haven't been able to sustain themselves. So I think the economics of the business are becoming really squeezed, and it's probably a bit of a depressing fact, but I feel like it's very reflective of society, at least in like the European Western context, which is like the middle class is just being completely decimated, and the what's it called, the kind of the switch from resource being what's the word I'm looking for? The middle class is being decimated, and the resource exchange between like the highs and the lows is just like becoming increasingly challenging. So I think it's a reflection of society, and all that really means is like the stuff that we really love, which operates in the middle class, which isn't a top 10 record, is struggling more and more, and that's like a challenging, somewhat depressing view to have. But hopefully I think like we're like at the start of a restructure, at the start of a change that will be able to get us through this bit.
Yeah, I mean, this is something again that we've talked about a fair bit on the show. To what extent do you think the challenges facing like you say, the sort of middle section, which is quite a big, the majority actually, I would say, of people who are, who have actually the potential to make a living from music. To what extent do you think the challenges facing these people are structural in the economy? And by that, I mean, the cost of living crisis, the, inflation and the way that's affected the touring business. And how much do you think is specific to our industry itself? I mean, you said some really interesting things on that in that conversation with Jamie about streaming, and this is obviously, the hottest of hot topics in the industry at the moment. So, I mean, how do you look at those two things? Because I think you're absolutely right to say that this reflects the wider economy and society. So how much of it is that, and how much of it is stuff which is, specific to what we do you think?
I think like our bit of the cultural industry, like music and independent music, is it's impossible to take streaming out of the equation. Like how that's affected the economics of running an artist business is massive. But then at the same time, like 5 years ago, or like let's just say before the pandemic, closely before the pandemic, you could like make no money on streaming and have like a really nice touring career. And you could like make a decent business off the back of it, or you could sell enough records and have a nice touring business. And streaming could make no money, but you weren't really like bothered. But now it's like, there's like big acts who can't afford to tour because going on the road and doing 50 days and like just coming back, having just about broken even, maybe having sold like 150,000 tickets still makes no sense. So I think,
that is crazy. When you put it like that, it's insane.
It was that, you must have seen it, but I think it was like 2 years ago, Bonobo, who like Ninja Tune, probably biggest act. Maybe.
So one of the biggest acts, yeah.
Yeah, like probably one of the most successful touring acts within like independent music for a while. I put out this post where he was like he's like cancelling touring in America because it's completely unfeasible, and he's probably like selling like hundreds of thousands of tickets. You know what I mean? So I think like what we are seeing is like while streaming plays a big part in the sort of the economics of the business changing dramatically, the cost of living and how it's affected being able to tour, being able to get around, being able to like pay people. There's like so many elements of the business that are just changing dramatically and being affected that actually it creates like, it's just being squeezed, and it's like sort of being squeezed to the point where there's like not that much left to squeeze, But I think there's like really interesting, positive shoots that are really exciting, like the idea of being able to like build really effective like D2C businesses through Bandcamp, being able to like connect with your fans in like more interesting ways, like create digital, like, let's just call it digital or like direct to fan ways of communicating and be able to like own and operate your own channels. I think these are really exciting shoots of ways that you can build businesses. But yeah, I mean, it'd be remiss not to say that like what's happening in the world and how that's affecting our lives on a day-to-day basis, and that being transferred into this particular side of the business is pretty, it's pretty insane.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you talk a bit about the differences you perceive it between the challenges facing legacy acts, because I know you've got some pretty important legacy acts on the roster, and the challenges in, as you mentioned, breaking something completely new. What are the differences there as you perceive it?
I mean, it's very different. The thing about breaking something new is like you often, let's just assume it's a young person. Sometimes it's older people who are new. So I don't want to say it's always new people, but let's just assume generally it's like a younger person. The challenge there is like getting someone to a point in their career where they can afford to be a musician full time. And the tension is like, if they have this thing that they love that they want to do, but they like have to work a job or whatever, like work in a bar or whatever, to do stuff on the side to like make a living, like this, the ability to make brilliant work is really limited. Like you don't often have the capacity to like work in a bar and do whatever, like work in a shop, whatever, and like make an amazing record that's going to like change culture. Like it's just, the opportunities are so limited there. So you sort of have this constant tension, which is like keeping someone engaged and excited, and also like having the capacity to be very, very good. I think one of the issues is like, there's just so much stuff out there. It's like, has there ever been more DJs doing 2025? It's like,
no,
literally get all your mates together right now, and like 80% of them are DJs. Do you know what I mean? And we're all fighting for the same gigs, and there's never been more competition. And the crazy thing is like lots of it's all right. You know what I mean? Like lots of it's like decent. It's not like trash. It's not like 90% trash. It's like 70% all right. The issue is like, whereas it was like 50% amazing, now it's like 10% amazing. Like, so there's like this like big sea of just like sameness and stuff that's okay. And like everyone's, you know, it's like crabs in the bucket. Everyone's fighting for the same limited amount of stuff. So we think if you're breaking new stuff, the real issue is that like being able to like allow a business to actually grow to the point where it's sustainable, but actually like make stuff that's amazing in that time frame. That's the challenge. The second challenge with new stuff is like labels, publishers, agents. Their businesses are becoming so squeezed that they just become so incredibly cautious. You know what I mean? Like, whereas previously they'd want to sign stuff right at the start because they want to get there first. Now it's like they want to see it going off before they sign stuff. You know, they want to see it like get in somewhere before they even jump on. So, you know, I think there's like a value to that because it allows the artists to build something without the pressure of a label or publisher or whatever. And it also allows them to like really take control of what the business is. There's pluses there, but ultimately, you know, like without the support of an infrastructure that can really help things grow, it becomes even harder to go bigger. So I think those tension points are really challenging for new stuff. With legacy acts or like older acts that have been around for a long time, the perennial challenge is relevance and cultural credibility. And we live in an age where it's like all about novelty, newness. Like everybody's fascinated by like something new, something they haven't seen before, something that like wasn't on their feed 2 weeks ago. Yeah, if you've been around for like 20 years, 30 years, the challenge is like, how do you stay exciting? How do you stay something that people want to talk about and play on their radio shows and yeah, write about, etc. So they're very, very different challenges. You'd like to think that with an older act, you'd probably have a substantial business already. Like it'd have catalogue, it'd have a touring business. It's not always the case. So yeah, I think they face quite different challenges, but both of them are challenging.
You are 15 minutes into this episode or thereabouts, so well done for sticking around this long. I'm just going to take this opportunity to tell you about the ways you can support us on the podcast. We are completely dependent on our supporters to keep the lights on here. So you can head over to patreon.com/Scuba Official to join us via a subscription. And at the moment, we are running our annual pledge drive. So if you sign up to the musicality tier, you get a free Music Not Diving t-shirt delivered to your door in your size FOC. And that's pretty great, isn't it? So head over to, like I said, patreon.com/Scuba Official, and I'll let you get back to the episode. Okay, so there's a couple of things that I wanted to get you to expand upon from that conversation with Jamie, which I thought were really interesting. First of all, you gave an example of a new act. This is going back a while ago now. I think you said it was 2018 in the conversation. And you were talking about an act that was new then, who released their first album, did 2 years, and to kind of like, you know, the usual, the predictable response of like, yeah, so what? And then this act, you didn't specify who it was, but they spent 18 months or so touring, and then finally the record connected in a way actually, which is actually not dissimilar to a lot of the stories you hear from the kind of the pre-Napster era of music. You know, you have that kind of like almost like organic building process, oftentimes with the help of the label in that era. Anyway, this is maybe not so much the case now. I mean, has the world moved on from that happening? You know, having product out which takes 2 years to actually make sense? Because I mean, we're constantly told that, well, you know, it's got to be a new thing. You got to be able to pitch it because you know, you can only pitch new tracks or whatever on socials, DSPs. Is that still possible now? And talk a little bit about that example, and then we'll move on to perhaps trying to squeeze revenue from existing catalog in the best kind of a way with legacy acts. But yeah, talk a bit about that.
So when I used to work at record labels, I was at What for a while. We used to have this idea, like this target, like week one sales. So you build a campaign that was all about trying to get the record to chart, like the sort of the impact of the record had to be when the record came out. And I think what we're seeing now, a few years later, is that like the campaign kind of starts when the record comes out, because the way that DSPs work, streaming works, the way that people's attention works, is you really need to like work things for a much longer amount of time for it to have the best chance of success. And the example that I was talking about was a record that was released in 2018. did okay. I mean, it came out on a small independent label, did okay. And then I think around like 2021, it was just like stratospheric. The artist went from having, less than 100,000 monthly streams to having like 4 million monthly streams. And he'd actually put out an album in between that period too. But what happened was the record that came out in 2018 basically took 3 years to connect. And then it just like happened to be part of a sonic zeitgeist, like caught people. It had some songs on there that just went in the hundreds of millions of streams. And that all happened organically. And I think the lesson really for that, and the previous question around like breaking new stuff and looking after older stuff, it's like one thing that no one can take away from you. If you make something amazing, it will probably work. Like it might work right away. It might take 3 years. It might actually take 10 years. There's another act I look after, Nightmares on Wax. He's got an album called Inner Space Out of Sound, which is commercially his largest album by a long way. Yeah, a significant amount. I'm considering this is an act who's put out some genre-defining albums. Interestingly, that album probably like went off when it went off in America about 10 years after it came out. So the timeline of records is like sort of nuanced and idiosyncratic. But one thing that I think is like totally prevalent, which we should never ignore, it's like, whilst everyone will try and work out the science of how to break stuff, like one thing that you like absolutely cannot contest is like, when you make something amazing, it will work. It might take time. You might not know when it'll work. You might not be able to work out how to make it work, but it usually does work. Do you know what I mean? Like stuff that's truly brilliant does work. And I think going back to your earlier question around the challenges and new stuff, it's like, part of it is like people don't have the ability and the resource and the time to make stuff amazing anymore. Just like getting stuff to be okay and good is really the objective, because that's like quite easy and you could do it around your part-time job, etc. Not that many people are down for like, let's make this groundbreaking, let's invent a new sound, let's like, like reimagine what this means. Those things will work. I have faith in that. Like, it's rarely you put something out that's absolutely brilliant that doesn't work eventually.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting because, I mean, we've talked a lot on the show previously, I mean, going back a couple of years now, about the influence of music tech and how much easier it has made it to make a good record, good enough record, decent club track kind of thing. But like you say, if everyone is doing this and everyone is doing this to a sort of half decent standard, it doesn't really help anyone, does it really? Because if there's if the seeming incentive is to get to a stage where you can make stuff which is playable in a club, good enough, maybe not anymore, but in a previous era to get you a few DJ gigs, there isn't really that much incentive to really push the envelope and make something incredible. I mean, the truth is it's really difficult to make something incredible. I mean, that's the reality of it. I mean, there are, we've talked a bunch on the show about, just how challenging the album format is to deliver in a genuinely brilliant kind of a way. It's one of the hardest art forms, I think, to attempt. And, to some extent, anyone who even attempts it should be congratulated, because, I mean, doing it well is extremely difficult. But, I mean, what do you think about the tech angle? I mean, one kind of shadow hanging over this thing is the democratization, as it were, of distribution, which has led to so much stuff coming out and led to this kind of like, avalanche of stuff. I mean, how much of this is a problem for you trying to manage people's careers, trying to keep people motivated, trying to actually motivate people to do great work, to do the best they genuinely can, as opposed to just stuff which is, like you say, is good enough? Like from your perspective, like, how do you think about these things?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there, isn't there? There's a lot of noise out there.
yeah. I mean,
and I think you've got to I spend a lot of my time working with artists on the creative side and like building the strategy of the creative, rather than like being too heavy on the business side, because I think one of the few things that we can rely on is like a firm belief that like the really good stuff cuts through, and that perfect adage, like truth prevails. And it's that thing, really. I mean, you can't really contest that. Like, good stuff does cut through. So it's totally much more challenging with there being what is it, like 100,000 songs every single day uploaded to Spotify. It's like mad, isn't it? It's like absolutely mental. You're no longer are you competing with like other musicians. You're competing with like kids, adults, podcasters. Like, you know what I mean? You're competing with like such a broad sway of people who've just like made something and just put it up because they can. You're no longer competing with people who had to like jump through loads of hoops to get to the point where they're like able to get a record out. That's just like not the case anymore. You're competing with like everyone all of the time. But, you know, I think like quality prevails, and I think that like try to encourage people to stay committed to the belief in like making something very, very good and building a compelling and authentic story around it, and like, you know, being invested in the creative, being invested in like engaging what else is required to be an artist, is really important. I mean, that's like we try and spend most of our time focusing on those things, really. There's no way we can like tackle how do we get less people to release stuff, or like how do we get less rubbish music out there. Those questions feel like impossible to answer for us. But the other ones, just like how do we make something that's amazing, feels like something you could try and tackle.
Do you think marketing has become more important, or, you know, was it always just like this to an extent and it just seems like it now? Because I mean, so many of the conversations that artists have between each other consist of complaining about the need to, you know, do socials and that sort of thing. Like, do you think it's really got any worse, generally speaking, or does it just seem like that?
I don't know if it's worse or better. I think it just...
Yeah, maybe worse is the wrong terminology, but yeah.
I think like the issue... I was like, it's interesting when I was literally at a meeting last night with a group of young musicians, and like everyone was talking about social media and like everyone was like stressed about it. And part of me was thinking like, why, you know, like it's a channel, but there's actually loads of channels. And I think the way I like to think about it is, instead of thinking about marketing, I think about like storytelling. Like, what is the story that you're telling with your record or you as an artist? And what is the most interesting way to tell that story? Like, for some people, it's on social media. For some people, it's not on social media. It's creating real life experiences that people can come and interact with what you do, doing listening sessions. It's doing pop-ups. It's doing collaborations with people. It's like, there's plenty of ways to like build the universe around your record. I think the idea that like everyone's like, right, we need to get on socials and go viral, and like, that's just so whack. You know what I mean? It's so, if that's like the breadth of your thinking, like you're in trouble. You are in trouble, because you probably won't crack it on socials, number one. And number two, like, yeah, you've got to be smarter than that. You know what I mean? You've got to think smarter. And I think that, you know, one of the things that people who are creative have is like the ability to be creative and think sideways and think outside the box. And I think if you're if you're an artist and you're like, I go to the studio, I make tunes, and then someone else does the rest, is, yeah, you might win a battle, but you've lost the war. You know what I mean? Like, you just can't approach being a career musician like that. You've got to, that same level of creativity that you applied to your studio, you've got to apply to other things.
Yeah, I think maybe that is a difference, because I think in a bygone era, that probably was the approach to quite a lot of successful careers. Actually, you know, there was a career that a musician had, which was mostly spent in the studio and on the road, on stage, and then there was a very smart team of marketing people behind that. But actually, the music and the shows did most of the heavy lifting in terms of selling the music. And maybe, yeah, I think the necessity of a compelling story message around it, maybe that responsibility, or the responsibility to construct that, and the responsibility to communicate that, perhaps, you know, falls more on the artist soldiers more than it once did. Can you give me a couple of examples, if you can, of non-social media examples of this working? It doesn't.
Before I do that, can I
Yes.
comment on what you were just saying? Because I think what's interesting there is like, if you think about the musician in the context of Darwinism, it's like you've got to evolve to the environment, like otherwise you're going to get extinct. And the environment has changed. If you think your job is just what it was, then yeah, you're probably going to get extinct. You know what I mean? But the environment's changed, and like it's 2025 and the planet is 10,000 years old. Where it's like things change, you know, and you have to change too. So I think it's an important idea that people have to get their head around. Is like, yeah, the world is moving and it keeps turning, and you've got to evolve with it. Otherwise, you will probably get extinct. Like, the musician as a species has to evolve with the times.
Yeah, and you know, I think there are pros and cons to it. Like, for example, I mean, socials is a great example because, I mean, people bitch about it constantly. Yes, you're absolutely right. But actually, it's an opportunity to have much more control of your messaging than was ever previously true in the past.
Totally,
I mean,
man.
we've,
It's like,
yeah.
You have the ability to own that channel. It's your channel.
And like, no one can misquote you on your own social media channels. Do you know what I mean? They're like, sorry, yeah. Anyway,
You can talk about your things in the way that you want to talk about.
Yeah, exactly. The message is your own, basically. And then, it doesn't necessarily have to be done like that, as you say. But I mean, there are so many examples of it being done in a very effective way. I think perhaps just the fact that we're all constantly looking at our phones, and oftentimes Instagram or TikTok is the first thing you open, so you're constantly bombarded with these great examples of musicians doing great things on socials. So you think, oh, well, I've got to do that. But of course, that's not the case, really. So yeah, sorry. Back to my question. Give me some examples.
Two things that jump out for me, at least, in my own small echo chamber of things that I'm interested in, of things that I've had some success without social media. My favorite record this year is by an artist called Anais. She's a London-based singer, songwriter, producer. She makes sort of like jazz, soul, folk, like very interesting. I guess she's like the UK's sort of Solange type musician. Her record is a perfect example of something that's been built in the most organic way possible. But firstly, she's made an amazing record, absolutely exceptional, beautiful musical record. And she has done it like the old school way, like word of mouth. Someone sent it to me. It's taken, the campaign's been like 18 months long. She's made really nice, cool videos. She's like really invested in the creative. And I mean, like, obviously it's been put out on the internet. It's not like she's like doesn't use social media or anything, but it's not like gone viral. It's like she's not like had like a viral hit on a playlist or like a reel that's gone viral or whatever. It's like kind of grown the old school way, like everyone's been talking about it and everyone's like sent it to their mates. And then she just did a show last week, sold out Islington Assembly, which is like 1,000 cap in London. No easy feat. And I think that's a good example of like something that's just been done like, I don't even want to say like the old school way, but something that's been done like circumventing social media. She's not brilliant on social. She doesn't really use it that much. And she's like made an amazing record and made it look amazing. And the world around it's been gorgeous. And she's done some like listening sessions. She did a listening session in Paris and then in New York and then in Berlin or LA, I think. Invited people into the universe, like spent a lot of time bringing people to the record. And then all of those people experienced it and sent it and shared it with their mates. And before you know it, it's like having this really powerful network effect of like everyone who like in your echo chamber, like being into this record. And hopefully that's something that's going to extend. So I think that's a really good example of just like a really slow, gentle campaign that's dedicated to like bringing people to the music, creating moments, experiences where they can interact with it, not relying on socials or DSPs. And actually what's interesting, like in her case, DSPs have been really supported by like after the fact because everyone's been like playing this record. And I guess the other one, which is like, I guess it's a bit obvious now to say, but Soul, obviously probably like one of the standout acts of like the last 5 years. No social media, no marketing, exceptional music that everybody heard and wanted to like send it to their mate. Like there's the power of just people being affected by the thing you put out in the world is like unparalleled.
Yeah, I mean, Soul was an interesting one, isn't it? Because it's very much a sort of music industry insider kind of story. But one which broke out of that as well.
Yeah.
So there was a ton of sort of industry hype, but justified hype, apparently, because I mean it did work with a wider audience too, right? Actually, we had the show they did in London. It was just over a year ago now, I think. We had someone on the show who basically attended and told us the story of the show. That's a great example of this, isn't it? I mean, that show was just a kind of huge kind of cultural event in of itself, wasn't it?
Yeah, but in both of those cases, it's like word of mouth. You know what I mean? People experienced the thing and told their mates about it, and then they told their mates about it, and like over the period of a year or two, in both of those examples, like they work out. But I think the most powerful marketing is like doing something amazing and people wanting to share it with their mate. That if you like one person shares it with 10 mates and they share it with their 10 mates, it's like before you know it, you've got something really powerful on your hands.
Yeah. I mean, the question in my head, I'm talking about both those two things. And just the problem of getting something off the ground in the first place. You mentioned before, it's like it's very difficult for someone who's just starting, still got a day job. Talking about 18-month campaigns, before you make any money, really. How do those challenges get met? So how does one go about that? Is it just a case of telling people to be patient, telling people to be, realistic? Because I mean, it is a long slog, even when it works, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's always been a long slog. I mean,
that's true. Yeah,
the challenges now are challenging, but there was challenges like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. I mean, like the start of my career was in like the early 2010s, and yeah, like I had to work a job Monday to Friday, and then like in the evenings and weekends, I was like running a record label and DJing and for an event. You know what I mean? It was like, I don't think that changes. You still got to work harder than everyone else, and you've still got to like work around the clock, and then eventually it sticks. That whole premise of just grafting, you got to graft now, and you got to graft then.
No one wants to hear that, though, do they? That's just the unfortunate reality. Like, it just is really hard and requires just a ton of hard work, and there is no magic bullet to it, is there?
No,
there's no silver bullet.
Like very rarely can you. There's not often shortcuts. I think one of the things that social media has like created is a sense of there being shortcuts. And I think like 10 years ago, whatever, like people were like, right, this is what I want to do, and I want to do it, and I want to do it until it works. Now it's like, this is what I want to do, and in 6 months I'm going to buy a house. Like I'm going to go viral and buy a house and get a nice car. And it's like social media has created this sense that things just appear and they're big. And I think it's just an unrealistic sort of story around what happens. Because I think what actually happens, like whether it works on socials or not, is like somebody works for a long time and then you see it at the point where it started to work. But behind that moment is like whatever 5 years of graph. So I think the perspective and perception is just really, really warped. And I think social media has created that sense, that warped sense of like timing of things. But I don't know. I'd love for someone to come to this conversation, and if maybe you can find a guest where they've got like the answer to how things just happen real quick and you've got all of these shortcuts. Like I've tried so many shortcuts and they're not shortcuts. I've tried every single one and they just don't work. And the only thing that does work is like really good stuff, consistency, hard work, working harder than everyone else, staying at it, and having the patience to like just to wait for it to stick. But all of those things only really work if like this is the thing you have to do. I think a lot of people arrive at this career of like, this is the thing they want to do. And that's quite different to being the thing of like, I want to do this, whether 10 people are listening or 10,000 people are listening or 1 million people are listening. I have to do this because this is my life's journey. A lot of people arrive at this career is like, okay, man, I'd love to like tour and DJ and have like I love the lifestyle of it, which is like, I'm not knocking it, do whatever you want, you know what I mean? But if that's your intention, you're going to find it really hard. But if your journey is like, this is my story and I'm doing this, whether you're listening or not, that's going to get you there, you know what I mean? Because you are here for the right reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk a bit about the management of legacy acts. One of the things you talked about on the episode with Jamie was streaming and how good the streaming model is versus previous models for ensuring a consistent and long-lasting revenue stream for great records. This is something I think is probably poorly understood, generally speaking, in the kind of slightly hysterical discourse around streaming more generally. So I mean, with an act like Nine Miles and Wax, that must be a big part of the business, right?
Yeah, I want to caveat this answer by saying,
okay,
I am not like a streaming ambassador. I
often get accused of being a streaming ambassador, so it's okay.
I am somebody who is trying to build music businesses with artists. So I understand that it's important to embrace what's out there. So I have a neutral view on it. I also like don't use Spotify. I've like left it, you know what I mean? Like for personal reasons. So I just want to caveat that. But, streaming it's a two-sided coin in that it has given life to records that historically lifespan had run out. Like 10, let's just say that 10 or 15 years ago, like if you were at a record label, they used to build budgets that were like, records had a 3-year lifespan. If you had a big record, it would last 3 years, right? Because once everyone who was a fan of that record had bought the record, they were never going to buy it again. You could sell lots of records, unless it was like the Beatles or something, stuff that's just like people want to have on the shelves just to look at. But if you had like a great record that was very, very popular, it had like a short lifespan, a few years, then everybody wanted it, bought it, and then maybe they would go to some shows. Like, that's not to say there's still not more juice to squeeze, but in terms of like selling records, CDs, whatever the format is, even digital to a degree, it's like once you had it in your library, you're not buying it again, are you? You're not like, once you bought it once and it's in your drive, you're not going to buy it 10 times more. You're just going to have it and listen to it maybe 1,000,000 times, but you only pay for it once. And I think what streaming has done, which is positive, it's given a way longer life to very important records, lots of brilliant music that their lifespan stopped. So for many, actually, I mean, like, people who've got exciting records in their catalogue and who, had made groundbreaking music that's still relevant. Like, just because it's old doesn't mean it's relevant anymore. I'm talking about people who made great music that is still great, that people want to listen to. If you could put a record out that, like, in 1995, let's talk about Nightmares, I don't know, Smokers came out in 94, I think, that changed the landscape of music in electronic music. After a few years, people kind of stopped buying it en masse, And now, 30 years is going to be the anniversary of Smoker's Delight in 2026. It's still a massive record. And for what record is one of the most celebrated electronic music labels on the planet, in my opinion, one of the best, that's a really important record today, So you get these labels like Warp, Ninja Tune, Domino, I'd say, like a lot of the indies that we love that come from a generation where like the record label was something that you like adored and attached yourself to. Like, I really love record labels. I grew up in Manchester being a fan of Factory and the sort of the mythology around the label and the bands that came from there, and that took me on
it's the logo on the back of the CD, or the vinyl, whatever.
Yeah, and it was like tribal, man. I wanted to like you like really adored the record label because of their curatorial policy and stuff. And for a lot of those labels that are still around, like some of them aren't around anymore, a lot of those labels that are still around, like a Ninja or a Warp, it's like the catalogue is keeping those labels alive to a degree. Like, even if you've got like new stuff that's really hot and exciting, because of the way that streaming works now, it's like the money doesn't come back for way later now. So a lot of labels are having to activate, let's say, like bring their catalogue to life. And thankfully so, because a lot of that music is still amazing and still better than some of the stuff that we're listening to today. So I think there's like a two-sided coin, to answer your question in a roundabout way. Streaming gives music a much longer life. If it's very good, it will have a long life. If it's not very good, it will have a short life. And unfortunately, on the other hand, if you are a new artist and don't have a catalogue, for example, and you're trying to like break, and unfortunately, the problem with streaming is like you're now suddenly competing with the mum down the road who's like works in Tesco's, like just put a song on, like, like that's your competition now. And Aphex and Nightmares and James Blake. I'm Frank Ocean, and like you compete with everyone at the same time. So yeah, it's like really hard for new stuff. It's really, really, really hard to build strong businesses that are reliant on streaming. But what I'm seeing now more than we were seeing a few years ago is the idea, like record labels were really in a spin about putting music out, and they'd become very reliant on this like toxic culture around playlisting. They're like, the whole model was like how to get songs playlisted. And now what we're seeing is playlisting. Like, you could be on a really big playlist and it will make very little difference to how much music is, how much that song is streamed. So we're seeing the power change dramatically. And I feel like, at least the conversations I'm having with record labels is like, we're no longer building businesses that are like building campaigns that are reliant on streaming channels. Like, they are very useful and can be very helpful, but it's a really dangerous position to put your eggs in that particular basket. So we're actually thinking about like, how do you build a stronger D2C business? How do you build channels that you're in ownership of, that you can directly speak to your fans with? So we're seeing a shift become a lot less reliant to streaming. And also, like, even in the context of streaming, like relying on Spotify less and less and thinking about other channels like an Apple or a Deezer or whatever it might be. So yeah, it's a flip-sided coin, but I do think it's important to think about streaming as like a longer-term potential to the value of a record. which is really helpful when you understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the context of legacy acts, as you mentioned before, like a big part of the challenge is staying relevant and staying in people's minds, and where there's new material, trying to make that seem relevant in competition with your old material. As someone who's been releasing records for a long time, I absolutely feel that challenge. So talk a little bit about how you, in practical terms, address those issues with acts.
Right. So there's two things that we have to think about. When you've got an artist who has been around for a long time, there is power in the catalogue. And that catalogue, if it's alive and people are interacting with it, it's an extremely powerful tool. So what we do is actually we have these like parallel streams happening at the same time, is like keeping the catalogue alive and breathing and fully interacting with people, and having like a new music stream. So like, the relevancy of an artist is the cultural credibility and the relevancy of an artist is like really paramount. But they have a relationship to each other. Like new music powers old music, and old music powers new music. There's a really, really, when it's done well, there's a really healthy relationship between like how old and new music interact with each other. But I would say that's also the case for someone who's like been around 10 years. Thinking about your catalogue, like I imagine the first Kimby record, for example, still has a quite strong relationship to new music for Kimby, like that.
For sure.
There's a connection there. Like if they put something out new, that older record probably has a lift as well.
Yeah. And also for people actually who are, interested in the label more generally, the new stuff on the label, the key records in the catalogue absolutely drive people's interest in the new stuff too. Yeah.
And so what's really important there is not thinking about stuff as like old or new or old versus new. It's thinking about stuff in terms of its relevancy. So like if there's a record that happened to come out 15 years ago, it still sounds amazing. It still sounds really fresh, which I would say like Kimby Record's a good example. It still sounds like, you listen to it now, it's still like, this could be made today or tomorrow. It still sounds really, really, really special. But I think the important thing is like not thinking about music as old or new. It's thinking about it in terms of its like timeliness or its relevance, and thinking about when you're in charge of catalogs or like have a relationship to catalog, it's like knowing when to like reframe it, knowing when to push it, knowing like if something's happening in the zeitgeist, like knowing when to like have a record that joins that story. So keeping the catalog alive is really important, and being really tactical and strategic about like how and when you choose to do those things. Knowing that new music is really important to keep an artist's business alive, keeping it connected to cultural credibility. And, the best case scenario, you put out a record that's massive, and then 15 years later, put out another record that's massive. You always want to be trying to making stuff that's like going to get really big. So the A&R approach has to be really, really sensible. It's like, how do you keep making records that are going to be considered brilliant and become successful? So there's a real you have to, from an A&R point of view, you have to be thinking about those things all of the time. You can't, but it's unhelpful to think about things as old and new. I think it's more about like, what is the best timely way to approach either putting new music out or reframing music that's come out already. And the other good thing about streaming is like, for a lot of people, I would consider like anyone who's, sorry to interrupt you, but anyone who's not like in the business, for most people who listen to music, like, like your mates, my wife, like just normal people who are like into cool stuff, but they're not like, looking at the sleeve notes, you know what I mean? They're not like those kind of notes.
The average civilian, basically.
Yeah, just like people who are into stuff, but they're not like fucking looking at the sleeve notes. For them, it's like if they hear stuff, they're not thinking, oh, this came out 15 years ago. They're just like, I like this song. You know what I mean? And so there's another beautiful thing with streaming, which is like, it makes things ageless. Like no one's interacting with it and thinking, they don't even know when it came out. You know what I mean? So there's a power in that too. So I think, with streaming and catalogs and new music, it's all about like knowing how to tell that story and make the framing of the story as like relevant as possible. And knowing that people just like they're not like going on and knowing it's all when it came out, and no one scrolls all the way to the bottom, view credits, and looks at the age of the record label, except for like you and me and the people listening to this podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's talk about D2C a little bit. This is something we've gone into in some detail on the show specifically Bandcamp, but obviously there's other platforms too, and like some interesting new entrants into the area. Have you got any examples of a particularly good artist approach or a particularly effective artist approach to D2C stuff that has become a big part of their business?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, I'm sure an obvious reference to everyone listening to this podcast, but Bandcamp remains an extremely powerful tool for people. Like the ability to like build a real life network and interact with them properly on there, like whether it's hosting streams or like selling merch or doing exclusive product for Bandcamp. I think what we're seeing is like even much larger acts who do have a lot of success on streaming and do sell thousands of records globally. Bandcamp is becoming like one of the most important platforms. I'll give you an example with Nightmares on Wax, for example. We just put out a record in November called Echo 45 Sound System, had some big features on there. Yassine Bey used to be called Moss Death, Green Tea Paint, like, a big record with like big high profile names on there. Very successful start. Bandcamp was the number one channel for physical sales globally. Yeah.
Do you mean by revenue or units or both?
By volume. Like we sold the most physical product on Bandcamp in the first month than we did anywhere singularly.
I mean, that's great news, isn't it, for a campaign? Do you know what I mean?
It's amazing.
Like, yeah. Totally.
But we invested in it. We did a fan only broadcast on there. We launched a single on there first. Like we really invested in that particular channel. And part of the reason was not because we like wanted to own all of the revenue, whilst that's nice. Part of the reason for that particular like objective of the campaign was that we wanted to have people listen to the record. That particular record was made to be listened to start to finish. Whilst that sounds like a an obvious thing to say, but it wasn't a record full of singles. It was like designed to be listened to from start to finish. In fact, there's a version of that record which is a 45-minute song, which was kind of supposed to be the original version of the song, but we had to cut it up into tracks for streaming. And we just knew that we like needed the audience to interact with it in a particular way, which was kind of incompatible with streaming, to be honest. It's like streaming's been really good for that record, but the version of the record that shows it at its best is a 47-minute track. It's like a pirate radio broadcast. So we had to build a campaign that like allowed people to interact with that and see that first and foremost. So we like really prioritized Bandcamp, really prioritized like putting stuff on there first, like putting versions on there that we're going to encourage people to listen to it in an interesting way. And it came back in dividends. So I think the examples that I've seen as a fan, there's also the other things that I've noticed on Bandcamp, like just as a fan more than stuff I've worked on, is these like, there's a couple of labels that I follow. I think there's one in particular called Death Is Not the End that I've been really digging recently. It's like they do these like reissues of just lost tapes. Like one of my favorite things that I discovered this year, which is like, I think it came out a couple of years ago, was this like a tape of a Leeds house party that's like sound system, reggae, boogie. It's like a live broadcast. It's like, wow, without a doubt, like one of the best things I've heard this year. But that label's a good example.
What's that called?
The label's called Death Is, I'll send you a link after. The label's called Death Is Not the End, and the record, I'll have to send you a link to it, is absolutely exceptional. Maybe we can put it in the chat. That's a good example of someone, they like have built a whole community on there. You know what I mean? Like people, I don't even think you can't even listen to that stuff on streaming, firstly. And I think it's a tape-based label, so the physical side of it's tricky too, unless you have a tape deck.
Yeah, I kind of get the impression that most people that buy cassettes these days don't actually have
cassettes. Yeah, exactly. They're like nice ornaments to have. But I think there's like, that in and of itself is interesting. They've like clearly worked out that people want to own something, whether they choose to listen to the music through that place or not. And they've got like clearly like sell stuff directly by digital. So, but they've built a really, really, really like not a small audience, but it's really focused, it's really specific. And they've ignored the traditional stuff, ignored socials in a major way, ignored DSPs. They've like really dedicated themselves to this like D2C channel. But I think though, there's examples like that, which I think are really, really important lessons for people. It's like if you have a bit of patience and you are prepared to be consistent, you can actually grow something that you own yourself really, really well. And it can be, like when you start owning everything, you don't have to sell that much. You don't have to sell hundreds of thousands of things if you own everything. You could sell like, 10,000 and suddenly you've got like a crazy business on your hands,
Yep. Yeah. Okay. Tell me a little bit about your experience working at Warp. I believe you were on the marketing side there, but that's going back, that must have been 10 years ago now, right?
Yeah, I think I was there. I think it was 2014. 2014 to like 2016-ish.
Yeah. I mean, that's an
Or
interesting,
2015.
that's a really interesting time because that's kind of around the advent of streaming becoming a significant part of this kind of a business. Talk a bit about that and how the differences there. What was that experience like?
I started my first job. When I started, I was like sort of friends with the label. Like I had been obsessed with the label since I was a kid. Had emailed them every month for like 5 years. You know what I mean? I'd like
Okay.
just wanted to be there. And in the time it took me to get there, I'd built something myself, my own labels, and I hadn't started management by then, but yeah, I like started doing my own things.
Let me just interrupt you. What were you releasing on your labels? What kind of stuff was it?
I ran a label it was like kind of this. I think we were in Berlin at the same time, and I think I got to Berlin around 2010, and the first label was called Something Sounds, and it was sort of like not too dissimilar to some of the stuff that you were putting out that was a bit more club focused. I guess the biggest record we had was like a record by Ella Final called More Than Me, which was like quite a big record. We were basically doing like 12s and EPs that were like fairly successful. Like if you sold 1,000 records back in those days, it was like
it was good. Yeah,
it was like a big record at the time. Lots of people were playing, and there wasn't as much competition as there was now, and you could like really build like pretty strong sort of businesses as a label. But we were in our very, very early 20s, and we all had like part-time jobs and stuff. It was, no one was taking a wage, but we were all like living great lives off the back of this thing that people were interested in. And what was I going to say? Yeah. And then when I went to work for Warp, the first record I did was Apex's comeback record. I think I'd been there for a week and they were like, Apex is back. Like it was Cyro. It ended up being nominated for a Grammy. It was his first record in about 10 years. That was the first campaign that I ran. It was the first thing I did at Warp actually. And then the other records that I was doing was I did Apex, and then I did, at the time, it was quite an highly anticipated Hudson Mohawk album, which sort of came just off the back of his Tonight project. So it's quite a big record at the time. The expectations were quite big at the time for that record. And then I did Flying Lotus's record called You're Dead, which was kind of his like breakthrough. Like Solange was on there, Erica was on there. It was like, his like first foray into like more crossover-y stuff. It was like quite a big project. They were the first that was my first run of records at What, and I was running the campaigns. So I was like, my job title was head of marketing, but I guess it's more traditionally what you would call a product manager at a record label. It's like the person that is responsible for the campaign, basically. I'm sure other labels have different names for it, but that's what we called it at Warp.
Yeah. So let me ask you, was there anything you did in those campaigns that you definitely wouldn't do today? Or were there any, big kind of like anything that sticks out in your mind that maybe wouldn't work, or maybe would actually work and perhaps would be overlooked today?
I mean, do you know what? So it's such a good question, and my answer is going to be really disappointing. The issue was like that was a really fun time to work at a record label because people were still buying records and they were streaming. So the business had after a few years of really struggling with like digital and collapsing, and suddenly there was like new frontiers happening. So it was actually like weirdly quite an exciting, affluent time to be at a record label, especially one where people still bought records, So like suddenly you had like the business had grown again. So it was kind of like a good time to be there. And luckily for me, it was like 3 really highly anticipated records. So, I mean, Aphex was just like a walk in the park. I mean, it was like anything that Aphex puts out, people dig it. And he had to put an album out for 10 years. And it was like the art direction, the A&R around it was brilliant. And it was kind of like one of the old sort of Warp team was still really involved in that. So it was like really well done. And I inherited it and I just had to do the campaign of it. And so it was like kind of easy not expensive. Then we won a Grammy, and we did, one of the things that we did so well was like we like really prioritized the experience of interacting with the record. So like, we hosted this listening in London at, I forget what it's called now. That it used to be that place in London Fields downstairs. I forget what's called now. You know, it's like we did a lot of things that really like forced people to interact with the record in a cool way. But anyway, to answer your question, things that we did then that we shouldn't have done. I mean, this is not going to be very interesting, but one thing I remember about the Hudson Mohawk record was like we made the mistake, I believe, of leading with what we wanted people to feel by the end of the campaign, but we led with that instead of started the campaign with where the fans were. And it's a really important lesson for.
Do you mean like
since.
picking singles by that? Or?
That was like one way of describing it. Yeah, but that's like one of the ways we did it. We did it in a few ways, but like, you know, we made the mistake of like having this idea for what we wanted to achieve, like where we wanted to get to with Hudmo. You know, at the time he was like still with Kanye. He'd just done like the whole All Day thing. Like, you know, he was big as a producer at the time. And we had this idea that he was going to become this like the next big super producer out of the UK. So we like had this like album full of like singles, like crossover pop singles, and it was a good record. But there was also bits on the record that were like really core Hudmo tracks, and we made the mistake of assuming that like where we wanted to get to, people would be there already in their minds. And actually, what you know, one of the biggest lessons from that campaign was like you've got to meet your fans where they are and take them with you. And I stand by that learning still to this day, whether that's what you choose to do, what singles, like how you choose to tell the story, like whatever it might be, like you got to know where your fans are and you got to take them with you, man. You can't assume they're going to just be there.
I have to say, a really, really interesting point, and it makes complete sense. But I think it's something which people often lose sight of. Yeah, exactly. Like who are the core people, and particularly when you're trying to do something like that, which is kind of widen things out. Yeah, it's got to be a journey, hasn't it? It can't just be bosh. You got to accept this, you know?
Yeah. And it, you know, think that idea, bringing it to like where we are today, like something I've been talking a lot about to one of our acts is like the difference between fans and passive listeners. And what I mean by that is like the people who just like know your songs because they just like hear it, and they might even have it saved and they don't know what it's called, they don't know who it's by. And there might be loads of those people, and that's not a bad thing at all. They're probably like a really important part of what you do. But then there are people who are like fans, real fans, who will buy your record, who will save it, who will organize it, put it into playlist, who will give it to their mate. There's a difference between fans and listeners. And now I'm all about like building campaigns for the fans because they're the most reliable marketing tool you've got. You know, if you get 100 people, 1,000 people to love something, the chances that they'll send it to their mates is quite high. That's way more reliable than trying to get the press to cover it or getting positive reviews or whatever it might be. So that particular lesson has stayed with me throughout the whole of my career, and I still stand by that now. And now it's evolved and transformed into something that's even more detailed, which is like doing stuff to serve the core fan base and knowing how powerful that is. And even if that means like, you know, sometimes we do things like where we'll do like a thing on Bandcamp where we'll, for example, hosted this album broadcast and 500 people came to it, and making sure the artist is there talking to the fans directly. Like those 500 people, whilst it might only be 500 people and maybe that's only 500 streams, if every single one of those people buys a record, if every one of those people like sends it to their mate and they buy tickets to a show, like that's the business. You know what I mean? Trying to get like the algorithmic playlist or like the editorial playlist on Spotify and maybe they have like 1 million followers on there, whatever. That is not a business. You know what I mean? You can't build a business like that. You might have a bit of success with a song, but you can't build a business like that because that's not going to transfer into ticket buyers, record buyers. And now we're seeing more than ever, like the requirement for you to like really interact with your audience in that way more than ever.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, let's just talk a bit about your stuff at RA and the music media as a whole, as mentioned prior. This is an area of interest for me personally. Obviously, just crazy challenges, and have been crazy challenges now for, over a decade, I think it's fair to say, across media as a whole, music media in particular. How long have you been doing this, first of all? How aware of you when you were coming into it? How aware were you of the kind of challenges facing the whole sector? And yeah, talk a bit in general terms about your observations about music industry from a media perspective?
I mean, interestingly, I've been at RA since 2022, but actually I've always been in publishing and digital publishing. My first real job ever was working for Time Out in Berlin, which I was doing part-time whilst I was running the label and DJing. And then after that, I went to work for Vice. And whilst I was working at the advertising side of Vice, I was like understanding I was working on the business end of the magazine, but it was still in publishing. And it was, those days, like Vice was kind of like the new frontiers of making publishing work as a business. So I've always, my first love outside of records was like magazines, like physical magazines. So music and publishing has always been my the ingredients are the things that I'm like most interested in and have committed to. So yeah, arriving at RA in 2022, it was an interesting time. It was just coming at the tail end of the pandemic. RA had suffered some challenging times during the pandemic.
Some PR challenges, yeah.
Some PR challenges. The public perception of the brand was at an all-time low, I think it's fair to say. The discourse around the brand was at an all-time low. And to make matters worse, it was a business that was like built around events. So the economics of the business were also at an all-time low. And I was invited into the company at that time, and they'd created a new role. They'd created a few new roles because the leadership was changing. So they created this new role, which was to look after the creative of the brand, which, look, at the time, I'm not sure how many people would have wanted that job. I really like a challenge. I also really believe in the power of independent publishing in this space. And having worked on the artist side, at the label side, I just knew the vitality of an independent platform dedicated to like championing stuff that I'm into, like dance music, electronic music, interesting stuff. And there wasn't that many around. So whilst as a custodian of a brand and as a creative director, it probably is amongst the hardest things I've been required to do, or the most challenging briefs, because I'm sure everyone can remember at that time it was really in a unfortunate spot, let's say. For a few, and interestingly, like there was I like to call it an imperfect storm. There was like quite a few frontiers of negative perception around the brand at that time, and the business was in trouble because of the pandemic, like most businesses were. Ultimately, it was like probably not that many people who wanted to do that job in the first place, I imagine. I was interested because I believe in the power of independent publishing. I also know how vital it is for artists and record labels to have champions on their side who have the potential to help amplify the story. So, I took the job and I've enjoyed it. It's definitely turned out to be like the hardest job I have had, especially the first couple of years. Repairing the brand, getting people to fall in love with it again, and if not fall in love with it, respect it again, and at least, if not respect it again, be pleased for its presence in this ecosystem of the things that we operate within. And I think we're at a place now where, 3.5 years later, maybe 4 years later now, it's as a company, it's bigger than it's ever been. As a company, it's more successful than it's ever been. And what I mean by that, it's also like hosting more events. Like the ecosystem is larger now than it's ever been. Like more people are using it for events. Like we have more tools that are free and available for everybody that uses it to power their own small businesses or large businesses. And I'm really proud of the work that we've done in sort of like building the business back up, repairing the brand, and hopefully getting the creative direction of the platform back into a place where people really want to participate with it again. In the last year or so, I think it's been a really good example of that coming to life. Like, everyone, not everyone, but lots of people are sort of coming back to us to want to interact with us, like bigger acts, smaller acts, newer acts, older acts. It feels like it's become a really, really important part of the ecosystem again that is helpful to people and has a purposeful role within the sort of the scene or the scenes that we sort of operate across.
Yeah. Is there anything in particular that you could put your finger on that has made a difference in your contribution there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's not too dissimilar to what I was saying before, but like, I think people can spend a lot of time thinking about how they are perceived as an artist, as a big brand, whatever it might be. And they spend a huge amount of time thinking about like how to affect that perception. What's the marketing trick to change that perception, right? My whole mission at RA was like, let's forget that stuff for now. We're in trouble. You know what I mean? That is probably a conversation we don't even want to have right now. Let's focus 100% of our energy doing really good work, being as useful as possible, being as purposeful as possible, and try to like create a more circular economy around like our resource. So as part of the RA group, we call it, there's the magazine and there's the social channels and the sort of the way we champion music events, festivals, artists. But we also have this community interest company, which is called Doors Open, which we use the profits of. It's a non-profit company, but we use all of the money to host workshops, upskilling moments, education, harm reduction, those sorts of things, like being a useful, powerful, hopefully helpful tool within the ecosystem. So my whole mission for the first 3 years was like just trying to do as much really good stuff as possible that people would look at and be like, oh, I'm interested, but I want to read that thing, or like I'd like to watch that film, or I'd like to go to that event. We had the potential to pull things together that I don't think anyone else in the space does, at least at our scale. And whilst initially the conversation was like, how do we change how people feel about us? My decision was like, we focus all of our attention as a group, as a team, to being useful. And with that came good work. And with that came people's desire to like have us back in the room, you know what I mean? And be friends again.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's sort of like music, isn't it? Like if you do good stuff, then people, generally speaking, will come to you, right?
Yeah. And everyone, it's like goes back to that artist conversation we were having before. Like, of course, like everyone's like, what's the shortcut? You know what I mean? Like, what is what's the quick way of doing this? What's the least expensive, quick way of doing this? But, as we said earlier, like, unfortunately, the reality is like, if you've got the shortcut, let me know. Do you know what I mean? I have yet to find it. And the only thing that I can rely on is my belief and evidence that quality prevails and consistency of, like, if you do enough quality consistently enough, you will achieve your goals. It just might not happen at the speed you want it to happen.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
That's okay.
Yeah, it is. It is. Just a little bit of patience required sometimes. Let's just finish up by talking about Berlin. As you mentioned, you've been a resident there for a long time now. What is, and the sort of state of the Berlin club scene is a favorite topic of conversation on the podcast. So talk to me about Berlin. What's it like at the moment? Is it still good in your opinion? How's it changed?
Right.
All that stuff.
I came to Berlin in 2010 and I was here till 2014 and then I left. Just before I left, I met the person who's now my wife and ended up coming back here in 2020 during the pandemic because for personal reasons, we were starting a family and London wasn't the place to do that, which is where I was previously. When I got here in 2010, I can remember distinctly thinking, this is probably the best place in the world to be like under 25. If you want to just like have fun and are into music and clubs, at that time, I would argue it was probably the best in the world. It was fucking brilliant, man. It was like just at the end of like the Bar 25 era, like there was so many interesting spaces, so many interesting clubs, people like yourselves doing interesting things in the city. It was a really like exciting time to be here. I left in 2015, but I came back at 31 and I wasn't spending as much time in clubs. It's actually an amazing place to be a grown up with a family. It's actually one of the most compatible cities for the things I'm interested in as a grown up. But what I will say is in that middle bit, I really felt like it was in a little bit of a creative swamp. It was such a like uninteresting place. It becomes so like a cliche of its own success. You know what I mean? It become quite a boring, homogenous cliche of its own success. Interestingly now, and I think post the pandemic, I think it's what I'm noticing is there's a generation of German kids who are from diverse backgrounds, from different ethnic groups, different parts of the country have actually come to Berlin. And there's like a new generation of people who are not indebted to a quite singular view of European techno, who have a much more diverse and interesting references of club culture, but also like wider culture that I like bringing to the space. And the things that I'm going to now would not even be able to exist in 2010, which is interesting. But the thing that I personally think is in a really good place again. Interested to hear what the audience thinks. One thing I would like to say is like, even when Berlin's in a bad place, if you like going out and partying, there's very few places that allow you to do it in the way that Berlin does. Like, if going out and partying in London is like one of the most stressful experiences of your life. If you want to go and have some fun, not if you're working, that's a different story. If you're working, it's brilliant because like the hospitality side of things in London is great. Ibiza, great, you know what I mean? But yeah, going out and just having it, like, there's nowhere like Berlin, unfortunately.
I totally agree. Yeah. Listen, Kazim, thanks for so much for coming on the show, man.
Pleasure. A real pleasure. I've been enjoying the recent episodes, so glad to be here, man.
Yes, yeah, well, great to have you on. Thanks so much.
Thanks, man. See you later.
Music, not diving, with Scuba.